When it comes to teaching our kids to set boundaries, we can talk a pretty good game. But I think it's fair to say that as adults, we don't always practice what we preach. And that can leave us feeling exhausted and stretched too thin. Sound familiar? Well, Terri, licensed psychotherapist and author of Boundary Boss, is definitely the help we need as we learn to take control.
Well, think of your boundaries as like your personal rules of engagement, right? This like lets other people know what's okay and what's not okay, right? We can think of boundaries like a fence around a house, right? That's easy to visualize. And maybe there's a sign that says trespassers will be violated. That's easy. We're like, oh, okay, don't step over that fence because then you're going to be in trouble. Personal boundaries are a little more challenging because we don't have a fence, they change, and they're personalized to each person. So I like to describe it as having healthy boundaries means that you personally know what your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers are, and you have the ability to communicate them when you so choose.
That's a really hard part, is the communication of them and finding the words and the vocabulary to share that. Tell me about emotional labor and how it takes its toll.
Emotional labor is really all of the unpaid and invisible labor that traditionally women have done in relationships. It's basically keeping a house running. How much stuff do we do that no one knows that we do, right? A lot of things, making appointments, making sure it's clean, the toilet paper doesn't replace itself, all of those types of things. And what ends up happening if we have too much of this disparity in the power and the sharing of the responsibilities in a relationship, it really makes you resentful. So I talk about this in the book. There was a great story in Marie Claire about a journalist who was talking about her husband was off for the day and she's at work. They're both engineers. And he's like, can you call the dog walker and tell her I don't need her? And she was like, then she's like, oh, I had an epiphany. Like, that's ridiculous that he's an engineer and he knows how to use his phone. But like a lot of emotional labor is we become the middle people. We're like the producers of all of life. And so she went through a process of having a whiteboard, wrote down every single thing that she did, all of the things, getting cards for your mother, the kids, the teachers, the end of school, all the things, the sleepovers, the teeth, the whatever, and put it on there. And when he came home, she said, I'm really realizing that I've been resentful, that I'm doing so much more and I haven't asked you and that's on me. But now I just wrote everything I do. And so I'd like you to pick half of those things and then I'll do the other half. And I think, and at first he was like, wait a minute. And then he was like, oh yeah, all right, that seems fair. So having emotional labor that is unequal is having a poor internal boundary or disordered internal boundary for us because we think we should just do it. Yeah. But there are ways to speak up, as that woman did who wrote the thing.
So how do we get there? How do we create a protective boundary plan, as you call it?
Well, part of it is you have to know yourself. And if you're watching this and you're like, I don't know, what are my boundaries? Where do you feel resentful? That will tell you where a need is not being met or a boundary has been crossed. So we first have to do we have to do some inventories in our life to really go like, oh, wow, I do feel resentful. And I feel very resentful with this particular sibling. It always seems to be this sister that makes me crazy or that I feel taken advantage of or whatever it is. So we have to identify what it is and we have to understand ourselves. We come to not knowing anything about boundaries, honestly, I like to say, because you know who didn't teach you anything about boundaries?
I don't
anybody.
Names, but
I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, Mom, but just saying, Mom, Dad, teachers, grad school, nobody taught us. And actually what we learned, if you were you raised to be a good girl, Amity? Were you raised to be nice? Yeah. Were you raised to be kind?
Yes.
Giving, generous? Yes, yes, yes. So you were raised to have the disease to please, like most of us, which really means that not only did we not learn healthy boundaries, how to assert ourselves in an appropriate way, we learned the opposite. We learned that doing so makes us mean or aggressive or dramatic or selfish or self-centered or full of ourselves. There's so many myths that go along with this. So don't feel bad for not knowing.
Right.
because nobody taught you. It's like a language. Like if you wouldn't expect to be fluent in French because you really wanted to be,
Yeah.
you would know you needed to learn how to do it. So we have to acknowledge how we got here. And then we can slowly but surely look at our resentments and start changing the dances in those relationships.
I think that's so important how you tie that resentment to boundaries and learning where. And it's also, I think, even more important for victims of abuse who really struggle, who had their boundaries, I mean, smashed aside. So this is a really great place to start. And
Just a great topic for a book. And we have more of Terri's Boundary Bill of Rights that we mentioned on our website, plus a link to a pretty enlightening quiz you can take to better understand why you communicate the way you do and how you can communicate more effectively with others. So go check that out.